Imagine this, a freezing December night in 1943, deep in enemy territory. A young American soldier huddles in a muddy foxhole, the bitter cold biting through his uniform like knives. Artillery screams overhead, shaking the earth. He steps out for just a moment, and in that instant, a German mortar shell obliterates the spot where he stood seconds before. Shrapnel flies, screams echo, but he lives. Barely. What kind of man survives 5 brutal campaigns in World War II, scares death in the face countless times, and returns home with nightmares that never fully fade? This is the raw, unfiltered story of Thorvald Aanden, a quiet farm boy from the American heartland who became a warrior in the deadliest conflict humanity has ever known. A tale not of glory, but of grit, loss, and the fragile thread of survival. Stick around, because what Thorvald endured will make you question everything you think you know about war. Thorvald Aanden entered the world on a dusty farm in South Dakota, the eldest of 9 siblings, in a time when the Great Depression still cast its long shadow over the prairies. The wind howled endlessly across those flatlands, whipping up dirt storms that choked the air and turned the sky black. Life was hard, unforgiving. Mornings started before dawn with chores, milking cows, plowing fields, fixing fences under a sun that baked the earth dry or a winter that froze it solid. His parents, Henry and Tilly Aanden, were stoic Norwegian immigrants who taught him early that complaining got you nowhere. Work, Thorvald would later recall in his gravelly voice, that's all there was. But the world beyond the farm was unraveling. In Europe, Hitler's armies marched. In the Pacific, Japan struck like lightning. Thorvald, barely out of his teens, heard the news crackling over the family radio. Pearl Harbor bombed on December 7, 1941. He was working on a neighbor's farm in Underwood, Minnesota that day, his hands calloused from pitching hay. The shock rippled through the small town. Flags waved, boys enlisted, and the draft loomed like a gathering storm.
I was working at a farm in Underwood there at that time.
What did you think? What were you thinking?
There you got them all.
Do you remember any thoughts of when the Pearl Harbor was
I
bombed?
know.
The words, spoken decades later, carry the weight of faded memory, but the impact was immediate. America was at war, and in 1942, the draft notice arrived. Thorvald's parents could do nothing but watch him go. There's nothing they could do about it, he said flatly, hiding the fear that must have churned inside. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic speeches, just a bus ride to Camp Cook, California, where the Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore and the real training began. At Camp Cook, the 5th Armored Division, nicknamed the Victory Division, molded raw recruits into soldiers. The air smelled of salt spray and gun oil, the ground pounded under boots during endless drills. Thorvald learned to parachute, to drive tanks, to fire weapons that roared like thunder. Instructors barked orders, some hated for their cruelty, others respected for their toughness. Some I didn't like very good, Thorvald admitted with a wry chuckle. But he pushed through, knowing there was no choice. You knew you had to go through it. Maneuvers in Tennessee followed, sweltering heat, knee-deep mud, insects buzzing like enemy planes. The men bonded in the misery, sharing smokes and stories under starless skies. Then the orders came. Ship out from New York. The port buzzed with chaos, cranes loading crates, families waving handkerchiefs, soldiers masking their dread with jokes. But as the massive convoy steamed into the Atlantic, danger lurked beneath the waves. U-boats hunting in packs, ready to strike. What horrors awaited on the other side? The troop ship was a floating coffin packed with 5,000 terrified boys. No one told them the name of the vessel. They only knew it was one of over 100 gray silhouettes stretching to the horizon. The convoy zigzagged north, all the way to Newfoundland, to throw off the wolf packs of U-boats that hunted beneath the black water. 21 days. 21 endless, vomiting days. Thorvald stood on the deck the first morning out and felt the deck pitch like a drunk. Within hours, the Atlantic had him. The stench was immediate and total. Diesel, sweat, fear, and vomit that never quite cleaned from the stairwells. Meals were served twice a day, but most men couldn't keep anything down.
Yeah. Gave us some junk in the service. You got 2 meals a day in there, but you couldn't hardly eat anyway because you were sick to your stomach.
From the ship?
Yeah, from
Yeah.
the service.
The ship rolled. Men groaned in their bunks, stacked 6 high. Someone started singing "Nearer, My God, to Thee" and was quickly told to shut the hell up. Below decks, the air was thick and hot. Above, the wind cut straight through overcuts. Life jackets never came off. Every man slept with his helmet strapped on, waiting for the klaxon that would mean torpedoes. At night, the convoy went black. Not a single light allowed. The only glow came from the red tip of a cigarette quickly cupped in shaking hands. Destroyers circled like nervous sheepdogs, dropping depth charges that boomed through the hull and made your teeth rattle. Each explosion sounded exactly like the one that could end you. Thorvald found a spot near a ventilator shaft where the air was a little less foul. He wedged himself there, knees to chest, and tried to remember the smell of fresh-cut hay back in Underwood. It seemed impossible that such a place still existed. On the 14th night, a destroyer signaled submarine contact. The entire convoy turned hard, engines roaring. Men spilled from bunks, scrambling for lifeboats that would never hold them all. Thorvald felt the ship heel over so far that water poured across the deck. Then, nothing. False alarm. Or maybe the U-boat had simply missed. Either way, no one slept again that night. When the coast of England finally appeared through the fog, the relief was physical, like a fist unclenching in the gut. But the war was waiting on the other side of the gangplank, patient and hungry. As the men staggered down the ramp at Liverpool, legs unsteady from weeks at sea, Thorvald looked back once at the gray ship that had carried them through hell. He didn't know it yet, but the real dying was only beginning. Liverpool docks, late 1943. The air tasted of coal smoke and wet wool. Thorvald stepped off the gangplank onto British soil, and the cold hit him harder than any Dakota winter. It was a damp, bone-soaking cold that crawled inside your clothes and stayed there. They herded the division into cattle trucks and drove through blacked-out streets until the headlights picked out rows of half-moon Quonset huts gleaming like frozen ribs in the mist. Inside, the temperature was barely above freezing. Condensation ran down the curved metal walls and puddled on the concrete floor. The army issued 2 blankets each. It wasn't enough.
Oh, the fog. It's foggy, and they had us in these tin Quonsets, colder than Dickens. And we'd go to the motor pool and get some gas and put it in a can and light that to keep warm.
That winter, the men learned a new survival skill: stealing gasoline. At night, small groups slipped into the motor pool, siphoned a few gallons into empty ration cans, carried them back, punched holes in the lid, and set them alight. The blue flame hissed and spat, throwing just enough heat for 6 frozen soldiers to huddle around it like cavemen. The smell of burning petrol mixed with wet wool and unwashed bodies became the perfume of England. Days blurred into guard duty, vehicle maintenance, and endless rain. Food was still terrible: powdered eggs that tasted like chalk, canned spam, and tea strong enough to stand a spoon in. On rare passes into town, the Americans discovered fish and chips wrapped in newspaper, vinegar cutting through weeks of army slop like a miracle. Thorvald drank warm beer in pubs where the locals eyed the Yanks with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. "Bloody Yanks, overpaid, oversexed, and over here," they muttered. Thorvald's just shrugged and ordered another pint. But even in the pubs, the war was never far away. Air raid sirens wailed most nights. The men stumbled out of the Quonsets in the dark, helmets in hand, and watched the sky light up miles away as the Luftwaffe hit Manchester or Coventry. Searchlights swept the clouds like white fingers, ack-ack guns coughed. You could set your watch by the bombers. One morning, the fog lifted just long enough for Thorvald to see the English Channel glittering in the distance. Somewhere across that gray water, the real war was waiting, chewing up divisions and spitting out dog tags. He lit another gasoline fire that night, held his frostbitten hands over the flame, and tried not to think about what came next, because orders had already been cut. The 5th Armored was moving to the coast, embarkation for France, the big show. And somewhere in the fog, the invasion barges were already loading, waiting. July 1944. The beaches were already behind them, but the stink of them clung to everything. Diesel, cordite, rotting flesh, and the sweet, sick smell of bodies swelling in the sun. The 5th Armored rolled inland on roads lined with blasted hedgerows and burned-out Shermans still smoking like giant iron carcasses. Thorvald's tank, a battered M4 named Hellcat, lurched through villages where every wall was pocked with bullet holes and every church steeple lay in the street. French civilians stood in doorways, faces blank with shock. Some waved tiny American flags, others just stared, hollow-eyed, clutching dead children wrapped in blankets. The Bogage country was a killer. Thick earthen banks topped with ancient hedges turned every field into a fortress. German 88s sat hidden behind them, waiting for the first Sherman to poke its nose around a corner. Then flash, boom, and another tank brewed up, crew screaming as they tried to crawl out of the hatches before the ammunition cooked off. Thorvald's rode buttoned up, head out of the loader's hatch, eyes watering from cordite fumes. The inside of the tank was an oven, 120 degrees, the air thick with the stench of sweat, piss bottles, and fear.
You didn't sleep much.
But when you did, how could you? Did you just?
No, you got so tired you couldn't stay awake.
But did you have foxholes or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But then you got to didn't hardly dare to go to sleep because you figure you wouldn't wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody stick a knife in you or something.
Night was the worst. They dug slit trenches beside the tanks or crawled underneath the holes for cover. Rain turned the earth to soup. You lay there in the dark, listening to German patrols moving through the hedges, whispering in guttural voices just yards away. Once, Thorvald woke to find a German soldier standing over his foxhole, silhouetted against the moon. Both men froze. Then the Germans simply melted back into the shadows. Neither fired. Sometimes, survival was that thin. Gaze bled into weeks. They fought through Saint-Lô, where the streets were carpet-bombed by our own Air Force looked like the surface of the moon. Bodies lay so thick you had to push them aside with the tank tracks. The smell never left your nose. Ever. One afternoon, outside a shattered farmhouse, Thorvald's platoon was ordered to borrow eggs from the locals. The farmer refused. The lieutenant, a college boy from Boston who spoke perfect German, calmly put a .45 round into the dirt between the farmer's feet. Eggs appeared instantly, along with a slab of ham the size of a steering wheel. Nobody spoke on the way back to the tanks. By August, the breakout came. Patton's Third Army roared across France, and the 5th Armored was the spearhead. Towns fell so fast the men barely had time to scrawl "Kilroy was here" on the walls before moving on. Liberated Frenchmen poured wine into helmets, girls kissed dusty cheeks. For 3 glorious weeks it almost felt like victory. But Thorvald knew better. He had seen too many fresh-faced replacements arrive one day and become red mist the next. He had helped zip too many friends into mattress covers. And winter was coming. Ahead lay the Siegfried Line, the Rhine, and the black forests of Germany itself, where the dying would only get worse. Christmas Eve, 1943. The 5th Armored had clawed its way across the German border and become one of the first American units on Hitler's sacred soil. They stopped in a frozen pine forest near Maps called the Schnee Eifel. Someone found a half-destroyed Catholic church, dragged the pews outside, and set up folding tables in the snow. For once, the cooks had real turkey, real mashed potatoes, even canned cranberry sauce. A miracle. The men sat shoulder to shoulder in greatcoats white with frost, helmets off for the first time in weeks, passing cigarettes and trying to remember what peace felt like. A scratchy record player spun Bing Crosby's White Christmas. Someone laughed too loud. Someone else started crying and couldn't stop. Thorvald shared a foxhole on the edge of the perimeter with a kid from Iowa named Swenson. They had dug it deep, lined the bottom with pine boughs, and covered it with a poncho. For one night, they let themselves believe the war might pause. Then the call came. "Sergeant wants you at the command track, Aanden, right now." "Just a routine radio check," they said. 10 minutes, tops. Thorvald crawled out, slung his rifle, and trudged through knee-deep snow toward the glow of headlights 100 yards away. He had taken maybe 20 steps when the world ended.
His outfit was first on German soil. He and another soldier were in a foxhole. For some reason, he was called out. Another soldier jumped into the foxhole. The Germans fired a mortar shell and blew them all to pieces. For some reason, he was saved, he said.
The explosion punched the air out of his lungs. A red-black flash lit the forest like hell opening its doors. Snow, pine needles, and body parts rained down. When Thorvald's ears stopped ringing, he ran back through the smoke. The foxhole was simply gone, replaced with a smoking crater full of steaming meat and shredded with green wool. Swenson had jumped in the exact second Thorvald climbed out. Nothing bigger than a boot was ever found. The Christmas dinner continued 20 yards away. Men sat frozen with forks halfway to their mouths, while medics scraped what was left of Swenson into a poncho. Bing Crosby kept singing about dreaming of White Christmas. Nobody turned the record off. Thorvald stood at the crater's edge until an officer grabbed his arm and pulled him away. He never touched the turkey. That night, he lay under the stars, snowflakes melting on his face, and for the first time understood that survival was not a coin flip decided by something crueler than the enemy. And the war still had 16 months to go. 16 more months of coin flips. December 25th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The temperature had fallen to 10 degrees below zero. Breath froze on mustaches. Rifles had to be thawed over fires before they would shoot. The Germans had punched a hole 50 miles deep into the Allied lines in what would be called the Battle of the Bulge, and the 5th Armored was rushed north to plug it. They stopped in a snow-covered meadow outside a village whose name no one could pronounce. The cooks, God bless them, had somehow saved a second Christmas dinner. Real frozen turkey, instant potatoes, and even a few bottles of warm Coca-Cola. The men sat shoulder to shoulder in ammo crates and overturned buckets, helmets used as plates, laughing for the first time in weeks. Thorvald was spooning gravy when the air raid sirens began to howl.
They had a big Christmas dinner.
Uh-huh.
And while we was eating it, Germans come over and strafed us.
Oh, gosh.
The sky split open. Ju-87 Stukas dove out of the low clouds, sirens screaming like banshees. The first plane came straight at the meadow, black crosses stark against the gray. Tracers stitched the snow as the Messerschmitts followed, cannons hammering. Men dove under trucks, into ditches, anywhere. Plates flew. A turkey leg cartwheeled through the air like a white flack. Bullets whined and snapped, kicking up fountains of snow and frozen dirt. One GI took a 20mm round through the chest and sat down politely, as if suddenly very tired, then toppled face first into his mashed potatoes. Thorvald threw himself behind a half-track tire. The air smelled of aviation fuel and hot brass. A Stuka pulled up so low he could see the pilot's goggles. The man looked straight at him, expressionless, then banked away to rearm. 30 seconds, maybe 40. That was all it took. When the engines faded, the meadow looked like a slaughter pen. 6 men dead, a dozen wounded, Christmas dinner shredded across the snow like confetti from hell. Medics ran between the bodies, shouting for plasma. Someone was screaming for his mother in a high, childish voice. Thorvald stood up slowly, ears ringing, gravy dripping from his sleeve. He looked at the ruined food, the blood steaming in the cold, and laughed. One short, sharp bark that scared even him. Later that night, they ate cold sea rations in silence. No one spoke of miracles or holiday cheer again. And somewhere in the dark forest, the Germans were still coming. The worst winter of the war had only just begun, and the coldest nights were still ahead. After the bulge, sleep became the enemy. They lived in foxholes now. 2 men to a hole, 6 feet long, 3 feet deep, 2 feet wide. Just enough room to lie down if you curled like a dog. The ground was frozen so hard the entrenching tool rang like a bell. You chipped out ice until your hands bled, then lined the bottom with pine boughs that snapped like bones. A poncho stretched overhead kept out most of the snow, but not the cold. Frost formed on the inside of the canvas and dripped on your face all night. Thorvald shared his hole with a replacement from New Jersey who talked in his sleep about his girl back in Newark. Every night the kid whispered, "Rosie, Rosie," until one morning he didn't wake up, just froze solid with his eyes open, still whispering her name into the dark. The rule was simple: 1 man awake, 1 man asleep, but exhaustion doesn't obey rules. You would nod off with your rifle across your chest and jerk awake to find your buddy staring at you with the same terror in his eyes. Both of you had been dreaming of the same thing, a German with a bayonet sliding silently between the trees. Sometimes patrols came back with stories, a whole platoon found in the morning with their throats cut, still in their sleeping bags, not a shot fired. After that, no one closed both eyes, ever. Thorvald learned to sleep sitting up, back against the frozen wall of the hole, helmet tilted over his eyes, one hand on the Thompson, finger indexed along the trigger guard. He slept in 5 or 10-minute bursts, waking every time the wind shifted or a branch cracked. Once he woke to find a rat the size of a cat gnawing on his bootlace. He shot it with his .45. The muzzle flash lit the hole like lightning. His buddy never even stirred. He had learned to sleep through gunfire. The nights were so cold the metal of the guns burned your skin. Breath froze on the bolt and you had to piss on it to make it cycle. Men lost fingers to frostbite. Some lost their minds. One dawn, Thorvald woke to find the New Jersey kid gone, just his empty sleeping bag and a blood trail leading into the trees. They never found him. The Germans sometimes dragged men alive just to make the rest of us listen to the screams. That was the winter they stopped being boys. They became something quieter, harder. Eyes always moving, always counting exits, always listening for the soft footstall that meant tonight was your night. And somewhere ahead, across the frozen Rhine, the Reich was waiting with its last breath, ready to make the spring even bloodier than the winter. Germany, early spring 1945. The 5th Armored was rolling so fast the maps couldn't keep up. Villages surrendered before the first tank rounded the corner. White bed sheets hung from every window like surrender flags made of ghosts. One afternoon, the column halted outside a prosperous-looking farm on the Dutch-German border. The house was intact, windows shuttered, chimney cold. Intelligence said there might be SS holdouts hiding in the cellar. Thorvald's squad got the job. Clear it. They approached in single file, rifles up. The front door was unlocked. Inside smelled of sauerkraut and old people. A grandfather clock ticked too loud in the hallway. No one answered their shouts of "Kommen Sie heraus." Then, faint, a cough from below. The squad froze. Someone whispered, "Basement." The wooden stairs groaned under their boots. At the bottom, a heavy oak door stood ajar. Through the crack, they saw candlelight flickering on stone walls and heard muffled voices, old voices. No one wanted to kick that door, but orders were orders. Thorvald and 3 others stacked up. On 3, the point man booted the door. It swung in to reveal a tiny cellar room, shelves of canned plums, a coal stove, and 2 terrified elderly civilians, a man and a woman in their 80s, clinging to each other on a cot. The old man raised trembling hands. The woman began to pray in a cracked whisper. For one heartbeat, the Americans hesitated. Then someone behind Thorvald panicked and yelled, "Grenade!" 2 M2 pineapple grenades arced through the air almost in slow motion. Thorvald saw the old woman's mouth open in a silent scream as the spoons flew off with that unmistakable ping. The blast in the confined space was apocalyptic. The door blew off its hinges and slammed Thorvald against the opposite wall. Dust and blood filled the air like red fog. When the ringing stopped, there was only the soft patter of debris falling and the wet sound of something dripping. They went down again with flashlights. The old couple had been shredded, literally. The woman's head was gone. The man's torso was opened like a book. Pieces of them decorated the jars of preserves. No one spoke. One GI vomited until he dry heaved. Another sat on the stairs and cried like a child. Thorvald just stared at the blood on his hands and felt something inside him snap clean in two. A soundless break that would never mend.
We heard something down in the basement. We took and threw a grenade down in there. All it was a couple of old people, and we killed those 2 old people.
He never finished the sentence in the interview. He never needed to. That night, the squad drank captured schnapps until they passed out. No one toasted. No one sang. They just tried to drown the picture of those 2 old faces in the instant before the grenades left their hands. From that day on, whenever civilians waved white flags, Thorvald looked away. He had learned the hardest lesson of the war. Sometimes the enemy isn't the man with the gun. Sometimes it's the man who throws the grenade at shadows. And the road to Berlin still stretched ahead, paved with more shadows than any of them could count. Somewhere in the Rhineland, March 1945, the ground had turned into a lake of mud that sucked the boots off dead men. The 5th Armored was attacking a ridge held by Hitler Youth, fanatical 15-year-olds who fought until you put 3 rounds in their chests. During one assault, the advance stalled in a beet field. Both sides were pinned down, firing blindly over the rows. A young German soldier, maybe 17, took a burst across the stomach and fell between the lines. His cries carried over the gunfire, high and animal, refusing to die. Then a figure stood up in the American positions, hands empty, no helmet. A Catholic chaplain named Father O'Donnell. He wore only his collar and a rain-soaked overcoat. Someone yelled at him to get down. He didn't even look back.
Thorvald, you gotta tell about this here Catholic priest that crawled over the German lines to this wounded soldier.
Yeah.
Gave him the last rites.
Really?
Give him the communion.
And that was an enemy soldier he did it to.
Oh. And did the priest make it back?
Yeah.
What was the priest doing out on combat?
Well, they along with the unit.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, they have no fear, those Catholic priests.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a lot of respect for him because he was off there where the bullets were.
Yeah.
Father O'Donnell dropped to his belly and began crawling through the mud, rosary beads dragging behind him like a tail. German machine guns opened up immediately. Tracers snapped past his ears, kicking up geysers of dirt. American guns fell silent, afraid to hit him. The entire battlefield seemed to pause, watching this lone man inch forward under a hail of lead. 300 yards. It took him almost 20 minutes. Bullets plucked at his coat, stitched the mud around him, but never touched flesh. When he finally reached the dying boy, he rolled him gently, cradled the blond head in his lap, and began the Latin words of extreme unction. The boy's screams turned to sobs. He clutched the priest's hand like a child. The Germans stopped shooting. Even they watched in silence. When the rites were finished, Father O'Donnell kissed the boy's forehead, closed his eyes, and crawled back the same way he came, slower now, carrying the weight of what he had just done. Not a single bullet touched him on the return journey either. He stood up in the American lines covered head to toe in mud, looking like a statue that came to life. Someone tried to hand him a cigarette. His hands shook too hard to light it. Thorvald watched the whole thing from 50 yards away. Years later, he would say it was the only time in the entire war he saw something that felt holy. Not victory, not courage, just pure, stupid mercy in the middle of hell. The ridge fell an hour later. No one cheered. And somewhere behind the German lines, a mother would receive a telegram about a son who died with an enemy priest holding his hand. War had become that strange. But the strangest part was still to come. The day the shooting finally stopped, and the silence felt louder than the guns ever had. May 7th, 1945, somewhere east of Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. The 5th Armored had outrun its supply lines again. Fuel tanks were dry, rations down to 1K ration per man per day. The men looked like scarecrows in muddy overcoats, eyes sunken, cheeks hollow. That morning, the radios crackled with a message nobody believed at first. Cease fire. Repeat, cease fire. The Germans have surrendered. Silence fell across the front like a blanket dropped over a screaming child. Thorvald was sitting on the turret of his Sherman, cleaning the bore of the 75mm with a rag that had once was white. He stopped mid-stroke. Around him, other crews climbed out of their tanks and stood in the road, staring at each other as if they had forgotten how to speak. No bugles, no cheering, just the wind moving through pine trees and the soft clink of cooling engines.
Germany.
Did they hand you a letter, or what did they
No,
do?
no, they just heard it over the news or something, I don't know.
So what happened on your last days in the service? Once you got discharged or were told you were going to get out, what happened then?
We were glad, I know that. Still alive.
A German staff car appeared under a white flag. Out stepped a colonel in a spotless gray uniform, medals gleaming, face gray with exhaustion. He saluted the American lieutenant who walked forward to meet him. They shook hands like two men who had just finished a very long, very bad card game. No words, just the handshake. Then the Germans began walking out of the forest in long gray columns, rifles reversed, hands on heads. Thousands of them. Some were boys who looked 12. Others were old men with iron crosses from the First War. They shuffled past the American tanks without looking up. One Wehrmacht private dropped his helmet in the mud and didn't bother to pick it up. Nobody stopped him. Thorvald watched them go by and felt nothing. Not triumph, not hatred. Just a vast hollow quiet inside his chest. That night, the Americans and Germans shared the same field. Fires were lit. Someone produced a bottle of captured cognac. A German sergeant offered cigarettes. They passed the bottle back and forth. Enemies 5 minutes earlier. Brothers now. One GI pulled out a mouth organ and played Lily Marlene. The Germans sang along in low voices. Nobody translated the words. They weren't needed. Thorvald sat a little apart, smoking a Lucky Strike down to the filter, staring at the stars. He tried to feel something, anything. Joy, relief, pride. All he felt was tired, bone tired, soul tired. He thought about Swenson and the Christmas foxhole, about the old couple in the basement, about the German boy dying in Father O'Donnell's arms. He thought, I'm still breathing. That's all that's left. Later, when the fires burned low, he walked to the edge of the field and vomited quietly into the grass, not from drink, just from the sudden, terrible weight of being alive when so many weren't. The war in Europe was over, but for Thorvald Aanden, the real war, the one inside, was only beginning. And the road home still stretched 2 oceans wide, with nightmares riding shotgun every mile of the way. They told the men they were going home the southern route to avoid the North Atlantic storms. That meant Marseille, then a Liberty ship across the Mediterranean, through Gibraltar, and finally the endless gray of the Atlantic again. Another 25 days at sea, but this time nobody got seasick. They were too hollowed out for that. The ship was the USS Wakefield, a former luxury liner stripped bare and painted battleship gray. The men slept in canvas hammocks stacked 5 high in the hold. The air smelled of wet wool and the faint, sweet rot of victory that nobody quite believed in. Thorvald spent most days on deck, staring at the wake. He had a German Luger tucked in his musette bag, Zeiss binoculars around his neck, and a folded map covered in his buddies' signatures. Souvenirs. Proof it had really happened. At night, the ship's loudspeakers played big band music, but nobody danced. Men just sat in circles, passing bottles of warm beer and telling the same stories over and over, as if repeating them could make the dead come back. One evening, a sergeant stood up and started screaming at the ocean, "Where's my brother? Where's my goddamn brother?" 2 MPs dragged him below. Nobody tried to stop them. They all understood.
Yeah, you were just about thinking, they were thinking about sending you over to Japan, weren't they?
Yeah, they would, but I had too many points that I didn't need to go.
Oh, thank goodness. I think 5 battles was enough. 5 battles was enough. I think you did your time.
When the Statue of Liberty finally appeared through the haze, the deck erupted. Men who hadn't cried in years sobbed openly. Someone fired a flare gun into the sky. The band on the pier struck up "God Bless America," and the cheering hurt Thorvald's ears. He stood at the rail with his duffel bag at his feet, feeling nothing but a strange, buzzing emptiness. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. They herded the veterans into barracks that smelled of pine disinfectant and processed them like cattle. Medical exams, paperwork, new uniforms exchanged for ill-fitting civilian clothes. A sergeant handed Thorvald his discharge papers and a rupture ribbon with 5 battle stars. "Congratulations, soldier, you're a civilian again." Thorvald looked at the paper, then at the sergeant's clean-shaven face, and walked out without a word. He caught a train north, then a midnight taxi from Fergus Falls. 2 o'clock in the morning. The farmhouse was dark. He tapped on his parents' bedroom window like a thief. His mother opened the curtain, saw her son's gaunt face in the moonlight, and let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. They didn't hug right away. They just stared, as if making sure he was real. Inside, the kitchen still smelled of coffee and wood smoke, exactly like he remembered. He sat at the table in his new civilian trousers and realized he didn't know how to sit in a chair anymore. His body expected a foxhole. That first night, he slept in his childhood bed. At 0300, he woke screaming, fighting invisible hands around his throat. His father stood in the doorway, afraid to come closer. It would be years before anyone in the house dared wake him by touch. The war was over, but Thorvald Aanden had brought it home in his duffel bag, folded neatly between the Luger and the blood-stained map. And some doors, once opened, never close again. The first summer back, Thorvald hired out to neighbors, shocking grain and hauling milk cans for the creamery. He worked from dawn until he dropped, hoping exhaustion would buy him one dreamless night. It never did. He woke every morning with the sheets soaked in sweat, fists clenched, sometimes standing in the middle of the room with no memory of getting out of bed. The family learned the rules fast. Never touch him while he slept. Never slam a door. Never sneak up behind him. One Sunday after church, his youngest brother tried to wake him for dinner by shaking his shoulder. Thorvald came up swinging. The kid hit the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Blood ran from his nose. Thorvald stood over him wild-eyed, chest heaving, until recognition finally crawled back into his face. Then he walked outside and vomited in the lilac bushes. After that, they left a butter knife on the kitchen table at night. If someone needed him, they slid the knife across the linoleum. The metallic scrape carried down the hallway and woke him without danger.
Got nightmares and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They were scared of him.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody needed to wake you, they stood back and woke you up?
Well, they didn't want to get close to me.
Yeah, because I'm sure you'd jump right out of your skin practically.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get over that? Do you remember?
Well, it took several years.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oof.
Years. He married Clarice in 1948. She was a quiet girl from the next township who had waited tables at the cafe while he was gone. On their wedding night, he warned her, If I start hollering, just get out of the bed and stand in the doorway. Don't come close." She nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Some nights he still woke convinced the house was on fire or that Germans were coming through the window. Clarice would sit on the floor in her nightgown, back against the wall, and talk softly about ordinary things, the price of cream, the new bowl cough, tomorrow's weather, until his breathing slowed and the terror loosened its grip. Once, in 1954, their first boy was 6 months old and crying in the crib. Thorvald stumbled in half asleep, grabbed the baby by the ankle and lifted him like a grenade with the pin pulled. Clarice caught his wrist just in time. For a second, the room hung in perfect, knife-edged silence. Then the baby laughed, a bubbly, innocent sound, and something in Thorvald's broke open. He sank to his knees and sobbed into Clarice's lap while the child patted his head with tiny, confused hands. The nightmares never left completely. Even his grandchildren learned to wake Grandpa from a safe distance, calling, "It's okay, Grandpa, it's just us," from the doorway. But slowly, very slowly, the knife under the pillow became unnecessary. The screams grew farther apart. The war moved from the front of his mind to the back, like a heavy trunk pushed into the attic. Yet every November when the wind turns north and the first snow flies sideways across the fields, Thorvald still smells cordite and wet wool. He still hears Swenson calling from the crater. He still sees the old woman's mouth forming that silent scream in the cellar. And for a moment, he is 23 years old, curled in frozen mud, waiting for the next shell that has his name on it. Some wars end with surrender papers. Others just go quiet and wait in the dark. Thorvald Aanden never asked for parades. He never wrote a book, never gave a speech, never stood on a stage with a microphone. He just came home, worked the same land his father worked, raised 2 quiet sons, and carried the war inside him until it finally carried him out. But in the end, he left us 4 sentences, written with a dying man's left hand on a blood-stained silk map. "I'm coming home, boys." Those 6 words are the entire gospel of every soldier who ever shouldered a rifle and marched toward the sound of guns. They say survival is not the same as victory. Coming home alive is a miracle, not a debt, and sometimes a heavier burden than dying. The real war begins the day the shooting stops. Mercy is braver than killing. Ask the priest who crawled through the bullets. Hate can be quiet and still be lethal. Ask the Luger on the mantle. Gentle is harder than hard. Ask the grandson who is still trying. And finally, the dead never really leave us. They just wait at the next 3rd Saturday, coffee getting cold until the last living witness finally shows up. Thorvald's life was not heroic in the Hollywood sense. It was heroic in the way a farmer gets up at 4 in the morning with a bad heart and still feeds the cows before he feeds himself. He never glorified war. He never romanticized it. He simply bore witness to it, the way a tree bears the scars of lightning long after the storm has passed. And in doing so, he taught the only lesson that matters. War doesn't end when the flogs come down. It ends when the last heart that carried it finally stops beating. And even then, it whispers in the wind across the wheat for anyone willing to listen. So if you ever drive through northern Minnesota on a quiet back road and you see 5 cracked styrofoam cups on an old pickup tailgate, or a silk map on a Legion wall with one name smudged out by a lifetime of regret, or a grandfather pressing his hand to nursery glass like he's trying to reach across time itself, slow down, take your hat off, listen, because somewhere in that silence, Private Thorvald Aanden, farm boy, tank crewman, survivor, is still trying to tell you the same thing he finally wrote the night he died. Live gentle. The world has seen enough hard. Rest easy, old soldier. The watch is over. The boys are all here, and the coffee is finally hot.